the drugs were there. I did not put the narcotics there.
Police officers are held to high standards and expected to exemplify model citizenship by avoiding criminal activities. However, the individuals I'm about to show you in this video starkly deviated from this expectation. Instead of steering clear of a life of crime, these corrupt cops engaged in egregious actions, ranging from planting incriminating evidence on unsuspecting motorists to leading a murderous double life. Their conduct aligns more with that of hardened criminals than with people of the law. As anticipated, many of them ended up in prison. So I present to you corrupt cops who ended up in prison. Zachary Wester. Zachary Wester, a former sheriff's deputy in Jackson County, Florida, seemed like an ordinary law enforcement officer, but behind his badge and uniform, a sinister plot was unfolding. Wester's actions would not only tarnish his reputation, but also cast a dark shadow over the entire justice system. It was in 2018 when internal affairs investigators made a shocking discovery. Hidden in Wester's patrol car were drugs, carefully concealed from prying eyes. This revelation led to the immediate suspension of his duties and the launch of a full-scale investigation into his activities. Former Deputy Zachary Wester was convicted on multiple counts, including racketeering, official misconduct, fabricating evidence, perjury, false imprisonment, and possession of controlled substances and drug paraphernalia. His crimes have sent shockwaves through the community and raised serious questions about the integrity of our law enforcement agencies. Prosecutors alleged that Wester had been planting drugs in drivers' cars during routine traffic stops. He would then use this fabricated evidence to make arrests, all in an attempt to boost his arrest record and satisfy his insatiable thirst for power. Body camera footage obtained during the investigation revealed the true extent of Wester's corruption. In these chilling recordings, we see him surreptitiously holding baggies filled with drugs before conducting searches on the vehicles he had pulled over. It was a calculated act of deception, a betrayal of the trust placed in him by the community he had sworn to protect.
And officers' arrests come into question.
At this point, you are detained, okay?
I don't do anything. Okay. I don't mess with that stuff.
He essentially was employing like magic tricks to hide evidence.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. What we got there, my friend? Look at there.
In one case, Officer Wester stopped Teresa Odom for a defective brake light, and the next thing she knew, he was searching her truck for drugs. No one could have imagined that the drugs he claimed to find were actually planted by him. Teresa Odom, one of Wester's victims, bravely spoke out during the sentencing hearing, recounting the devastating impact his actions had on her life. Odom's reputation was tarnished, and she was deprived of precious time with her grandchild. Despite her vehement denial of the drugs being hers, she was coerced into pleading no contest and received 4 years of probation. Thankfully, her conviction has since been overturned, but the scars of this injustice will forever remain. The accusations against Wester have had far-reaching consequences. In the wake of the investigation, charges had to be dropped in nearly 120 cases between 2016 and 2018. Innocent individuals were wrongfully arrested and imprisoned, their lives forever altered by the actions of a corrupt cop. As the trial unfolded, Wester's wife and others pleaded for leniency, painting a picture of a good church-going man who volunteered in the community. Over 50 people sent letters to the judge expressing their support for Wester, but the court would not be swayed by these pleas, for the evidence against him was overwhelming. The judge at his trial talked about the immeasurable harm to the very fabric of the American justice system. So, the court found him guilty on multiple counts, and he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, not everyone thinks that justice was found on the day of his sentencing. However, the prosecutor who brought the trial to light reacted to the verdict this way.
Obviously, some of the victims are going to feel like justice wasn't served, and I know there's members of the community who's going to feel that way, but a jury has to go on what's presented to it and not what's heard in the community, and I think this jury did a good job and took their time.
Eric DeValconaire.
Eric DeValconaire is charged with involuntary manslaughter in the death of Cameron Lamb back in 2019.
The case of Eric DeValconaire, a former Kansas City police detective, has sent shockwaves through the community and ignited a nationwide conversation about police accountability. DeValconaire was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action in the fatal shooting of 26-year-old Cameron Lamb, a black man. This landmark conviction marks the first time since 1941 that a Kansas City law enforcement officer has stood trial for the fatal shooting of a black man. The tragic incident occurred on December 3, 2019, when DeVal Canary encountered Lamb in his pickup truck backing into his own garage. The events leading up to the shooting were set in motion when a police helicopter spotted a red truck chasing a purple Mustang at high speeds through a residential neighborhood. Prosecutors argued that DeVal Canary acted recklessly by entering Lamb's property without a warrant, knocking over a makeshift fence, and firing his weapon within seconds of encountering the pickup truck. During the 4-day trial, the defense contended that DeVal Canary, a 20-year veteran of the Kansas City Police Department and a member of its violent offender squad, was responding to an ongoing danger and had probable cause to enter Lamb's property. However, Judge J. Dale Youngs ruled that DeVal Canary and his partner had no justification to enter the property, as both did that day. Youngs emphasized that Lamb had an expectation of privacy on his property and that the officers had no arrest warrant, search warrant, or probable cause to obtain either.
Eric DeVal Canary, on count 1, the Class E felony of involuntary manslaughter in the 2nd degree, I sentence you to a term of incarceration in the Missouri Division of Adult Institutions of 3 years. On the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, I sentence you to a term of incarceration of 6 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections.
As the verdict was delivered, DeVal Canary slumped in his seat, and shouts of jubilation filled the courthouse hallway as Lamb's family and supporters embraced. DeVal Canary now faces a minimum statutory punishment of 3 years for involuntary manslaughter and 3 years for armed criminal action. The trial and convictions have exposed the strained relations between the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office and the Kansas City Police Department, with accusations of a lack of neutrality in the investigation. DeVal Canary's attorneys are expected to appeal the verdict, prolonging the legal battle and keeping the case in the public eye. Meanwhile, S. Lee Merritt, a lawyer representing the Lamb family, hailed the verdict as a momentous and historic step towards justice. The parents of Lamb's minor children have also filed a wrongful death lawsuit against DeVal Canary and the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners. The guilty verdicts in this case are not seen as an indictment of the entire Kansas City Police Department, but rather a reflection of the criminal justice system at work. Mayor Quinton Lucas emphasized that the process of investigation, indictment, and conviction is a regular occurrence, and the men and women of law enforcement will continue their vital work to ensure the safety of the city. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Greater Kansas City celebrated the verdict, highlighting the significance of this conviction in the fight for justice. The case of Eric DeVal Canary serves as a stark reminder of the importance of holding those in positions of power accountable and striving for a more equitable and just society. Sergeant Wayne Jenkins. It all began in 2007 when the Baltimore Police Department underwent a shift in policing strategy, concerned that the focus on drug-related crimes had overshadowed the growing issue of gun violence. The department created the GTTF. Led by Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, the unit was initially seen as a promising solution to the city's gun problem. The GTTF was established to tackle sophisticated gun trafficking cases. The Baltimore Police Department recognized that guns, not drugs, were the real problem plaguing the city. They wanted a smarter approach, targeting the bad guys with guns. With little fanfare, the GTTF set out to make a difference. A small unit of plainclothes officers, they operated in the shadows, their work largely unknown to the public. Their low profile allowed them to roam the streets, searching for illegal firearms without attracting attention. At first, their efforts seemed commendable. The GTTF made significant arrests and seized numerous weapons. They were praised as heroes, a bulwark against the chaos that plagued the city. Their superiors admired them, granting them special privileges and considering them role models within the department. But as time went on, the GTTF began to lose sight of their original mission. The focus on sophisticated gun trafficking cases faded, and the unit transformed into just another group of plainclothes officers running amok in the city. The GTTF lost its way. It became a breeding ground for corruption and abuse of power. They no longer operated within the confines of the law, but instead became a criminal enterprise themselves. Shielded by their reputation and the lack of public scrutiny, the GTTF embarked on a crime spree that would shock the city to its core. They stopped innocent people on the streets, robbing them of their possessions. They planted drugs and guns on unsuspecting individuals, framing them for crimes they didn't commit. They invaded people's homes, stealing from them under the guise of law enforcement. And to add insult to injury, they fraudulently charged the city for overtime they never worked. The extent of their misconduct was staggering. For years, they operated with impunity, their actions going unnoticed or unaddressed. While the public's attention was focused on cases of police brutality brutality, this web of lies, theft, and deception went unchecked. Even the outcry over the death of Freddie Gray, a young African-American man who died in police custody, did little to deter the GTTF's criminal activities. While officials spoke of reform and accountability, the corrupt officers continued their reign of terror. But their reign of impunity would eventually come to an end. In an unexpected turn of events, a suburban drug investigation inadvertently exposed one officer's connections to a drug organization. This revelation led to an FBI wiretap reminiscent of a plotline from a crime drama.
A former Baltimore police sergeant with ties to the disgraced gun trace task force is now facing his own charges for what police say he did with a weapon.
In March 2017, 8 members of the GTTF were indicted and arrested on federal charges of robbery, extortion, overtime fraud, and drug trafficking. The truth about their criminal activities finally came to light. It was a stroke of luck that this suburban drug investigation led to the downfall of the GTTF. Investigators stumbled upon the truth, pulling at the thread until the entire web of corruption unraveled. 6 of the 8 arrested officers pleaded guilty to the charges, while 4 cooperated with the Justice Department, providing crucial testimony against the remaining 2. In February 2018, a jury convicted those 2 officers, and they were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 7 to 25 years. Gerard John Schaefer. In the quiet town of Neenah, Wisconsin, on March 26, 1946, a child was born who would grow up to become one of the most notorious killers in American history. Gerard John Schaefer Jr., background the first of 3 children, entered the world with a troubled destiny that would unfold in unimaginable ways. Gerard's father, Gerard John Schaefer Sr., was a traveling salesman, often absent from the household. His mother, Doris Marie Schaefer, was a housewife, struggling to maintain stability amidst the constant relocations forced upon the family. As Gerard entered adolescence, his disturbing fantasies began to take shape. He developed a penchant for sadomasochism and bondage, deriving pleasure from inflicting pain upon himself. These rituals often involved tying himself to a tree in remote locations and indulging in acts that would later foreshadow the horrors to come. Despite his troubled nature, Gerard was considered a promising student by his teachers. He excelled in sports, playing on the varsity football team and showcasing his skills as an excellent golfer. But beneath the surface, a darkness was growing, one that would eventually consume him. Gerard's academic journey led him to Florida Atlantic University, FAU, in Boca Raton, where he began his studies in 1968 with aspirations of obtaining a Bachelor of Arts in Education. It was during this time that he met Martha Marty Louise Fogg, a fellow FAU student, and the two embarked on a tumultuous relationship that ended in a divorce. It was in this uncertain period that Gerard's path took a dark turn. He applied for a vacancy within the Wilton Manors Police Department on September 1, 1970. Concealing his previous firings from teaching positions, Gerard falsely claimed to have research experience at FAU and to have recently returned from Morocco. Gerard's previous work history went unchecked, and he was formally inducted into the Broward County Police Department in September 1971. Little did anyone know that this would be the beginning of a reign of terror that would shock the nation. As Gerard John Schaefer donned the uniform of the Broward County Police Department, little did anyone suspect the darkness that lurked beneath his facade of authority. His position as a law enforcement officer provided him with the perfect cover to carry out his sadistic desires. This is the chilling story of Gerard's transformation from a corrupt cop to a sadistic serial killer. It was in 1972 when Gerard's reign of terror began to unfold. 2 teenage girls, their lives forever changed, encountered the sinister officer. They would become the key to unmasking the true nature of the man known as the Killer Cop, the Hangman, and the Butcher of Blind Creek. The evidence against Gerard was overwhelming. The bodies of 2 young women were discovered buried in shallow graves, bearing the marks of extreme violence and sadism. Gerard's favored method of binding restrained women to trees with a hangman's noose around their necks before subjecting them to torture and murder sent shockwaves through the community. The investigation into Gerard's heinous crimes revealed a pattern of abduction, torture, and sexual abuse. His victims, often young women and girls, were targeted, their lives cut short by the hands of a man who had sworn to protect and serve. The trial that followed exposed the depths of Gerard's depravity. Eyewitness testimonies, physical evidence, and his own disturbing writings detailing how to properly execute women painted a chilling picture of a man consumed by sadistic desires. Despite Gerard's claims of innocence and his attempts to discredit the evidence against him, the jury found him guilty of the murders. In 1973, he was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment at Florida State Prison, where he would spend the rest of his days. Gerard's reign of terror had come to an end, but the true extent of his crimes may never be known. Suspected of up to 26 additional murders, he took the secrets secrets of his victims' identities to the grave. In December 1995, Gerard met a fitting end when he was stabbed to death by a fellow inmate while serving his sentence. His death brought closure to the families of his victims, but the scars left by his sadistic acts will forever remain. Carol Cole. Carol Cole was born on May 9, 1938 in Sioux City, Iowa, to Laverne Cole and Vesta Cole. His family's journey took them to California when he was just a young boy seeking a fresh start. However, little did they know that the demons lurking within their own household would have a profound impact on young Carol's life. But it was a tragic event at the tender age of 8 that would forever change Carol's life. In a fit of rage and seeking revenge against his mother, Carol drowned one of his classmates, a boy named Dwayne, in a lake in Richmond, California. This act of violence became an obsession for young Carol, haunting his thoughts and fueling his desire for retribution. As Carol entered his teenage years, his troubled upbringing and the weight of his dark secret began to take their toll. He found solace in petty crimes, seeking an outlet for his anger and frustration. But these acts of rebellion only served to land him in trouble with the law, as he was frequently arrested for his delinquent behavior. Despite his troubled past, Carol's life took an unexpected turn when he joined the U.S. Army after high school. However, his time in the military was short-lived, as he was discharged for stealing pistols. This marked a turning point in Carol's life as he spiraled further into a world of darkness and criminality. In 1960, Carol's violent fantasies involving strangling women began to consume him. He attacked 2 couples parked in cars on a lover's lane, unleashing his twisted desires upon unsuspecting victims. In a bizarre twist, he even called the police to report his own violent fantasies, showcasing a disturbing desire for attention and a complete disregard for the lives he was endangering. Carol's escalating behavior led to his confinement in various mental hospitals, where he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. After his release from the mental hospitals, Carol moved to Texas, where he married Billy Whitworth, an alcoholic stripper. However, their marriage was far from stable, and it ended in tragedy when Carol burned down a motel after suspecting Whitworth of infidelity. This act of violence was a chilling precursor to the horrors that awaited Carol's future. And so, the stage was set for Carol Edward Eddie Cole's descent into darkness. After his release from mental hospitals, Carol Cole's violent fantasies involving strangling women escalated into horrifying reality. In 1971, he committed his first known murders, claiming the lives of Essie Louise Buck and an unidentified woman. These heinous acts marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would span several years and multiple states. Despite his violent tendencies, Carol managed to find love and companionship. In 1973, he married Diana Faye Younglove Paschal, a barmaid. However, their marriage was far from idyllic. Carol's dark desires and uncontrollable rage would soon shatter any semblance of normalcy. In 1979, Carol's marriage to Diana ended in tragedy when he strangled her to death. The details of this horrific act remain hauntingly vivid, a testament to the depths of Carol's depravity. With each murder, his thirst for violence and control grew stronger, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Carol's insatiable urge to kill led him to move across different states, leaving behind a string of victims and a trail of fear. His nomadic lifestyle allowed him to evade capture for a time as he continued to prey upon unsuspecting women. The exact number of his victims remains uncertain, as Carol himself couldn't recall the exact count due to his intoxicated state during the crimes. In 1980, Carol's reign of terror finally came to an end. He was arrested and confessed to at least 14 murders, shocking law enforcement and the public alike. The sheer brutality and callousness of his crimes sent shockwaves through the communities he had terrorized. Carol's arrest and subsequent conviction for 3 murders in Texas in 1981 marked a turning point in his life. He was sentenced to life in prison, but his story was far from over. The true extent of his crimes was yet to be fully uncovered. In 1984, Carol was extradited to Nevada, where he faced trial for the strangulation deaths of 2 women. The evidence against him was overwhelming, leaving no doubt about his guilt. The courtroom was filled with a mix of horror and fascination as the details of his gruesome acts were laid bare for all to hear. On December 6, 1985, Carol Edward Eddie Cole met his final fate. He was executed by lethal injection, bringing an end to his reign of terror. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing that this remorseless serial killer would never again walk among them. David Oliver.
Your Honor, I was chief for the Brimfield Police Department for 10 years, 10 months. There was a collective bargaining contract in place for the entire time I was there. There was never one grievance filed. Never one.
David Oliver, once a respected figure in law enforcement, gained notoriety for his humorous comments about criminals on the Brimfield Police Department's Facebook page. But behind the facade of wit and charm, a darker truth was lurking. In 2015, Oliver's world came crashing down when he was convicted on 4 misdemeanor counts, including assault of a female police officer who accused him of sexual harassment. These charges were just the tip of the iceberg, revealing a pattern of corruption and abuse of power that had plagued Oliver's tenure as police chief. The court proceedings shed light on a series of shocking events that unfolded under Oliver's watch. It was revealed that he had engaged in bribery, accepting illicit payments in exchange for turning a blind eye to criminal activities. Drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and even protection rackets were just some of the crimes that Oliver had allowed to flourish under his leadership, but it was the assault of a female police officer that ultimately led to his downfall. The victim, who bravely came forward to expose Oliver's misconduct, described a toxic work environment where harassment and intimidation were the norm. Oliver's abuse of power had created a culture of fear within the department, where those who dared to speak out were silenced or retaliated against. As the trial unfolded, the public was left in shock at the extent of Oliver's corruption. The evidence presented painted a damning picture of a man who had betrayed the trust of his community and tarnished the reputation of law enforcement. The court proceedings were closely followed by the media, turning Oliver's case into a national scandal. Former Brimfield Police Chief David Oliver has been found guilty on multiple charges, including assault and bribery. The court's decision sends a strong message that corruption within law enforcement will not be tolerated. The judge presiding over the case, Lori Pittman, delivered a scathing verdict, highlighting Oliver's lack of remorse and failure to take ownership of his actions. Pittman emphasized the importance of holding those in positions of power accountable, stating that no one is above the law. In the aftermath of his conviction, Oliver addressed the court, expressing that he had changed as a person and had been humbled by the experience. However, Judge Pittman remained unconvinced, citing his lack of genuine remorse and failure to fully acknowledge the harm he had caused. As a result of his conviction, Oliver was sentenced to 2 years probation, a mere slap on the wrist compared to the damage he had inflicted on the community and the lives he had affected. In addition, he was forced to surrender his certificate to be an officer, effectively ending his career in law enforcement. Daniel Holtzclaw.
All right, the verdict seemed to be in proper order. This is in the District Court of Oklahoma County, State of Oklahoma, the State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery.
In the quiet town of Enid, Oklahoma, a young man named Daniel Holtzclaw was born on December 10, 1986. Little did anyone know that this seemingly ordinary boy would grow up to become one of the most notorious corrupt cops in American history. Daniel was the son of Eric Holtzclaw, a lieutenant with the Enid Police Department, and Kumiko Holtzclaw, a Japanese mother. With a law enforcement officer as his father, it seemed almost destined that Daniel would follow in his footsteps. As he grew older, Daniel excelled both academically and athletically. He attended Enid High School, where he was known for his dedication and leadership on the football field as a linebacker. But it wasn't just his athletic prowess that set him apart. Daniel had a keen interest in criminal justice, which led him to pursue a degree in the field at Eastern Michigan University. In 2011, Daniel's dream became a reality as he proudly donned the uniform of the Oklahoma City Police Department. He was eager to serve and protect his community, believing that he could make a positive difference in the lives of those he encountered. However, little did anyone know that behind this facade of a dedicated officer, a dark and sinister side was lurking within Daniel Holtzclaw. It was during his time as a police officer that Daniel began to abuse his position of power. He used his access to confidential information to target vulnerable individuals, specifically African-American women with criminal histories. This calculated and predatory behavior would eventually lead to his downfall. Holtzclaw's modus operandi was chillingly methodical. He would run background checks on women with outstanding warrants or criminal records, using this information to coerce and manipulate them into sexual encounters. The very people he was sworn to protect became his victims, trapped in a web of fear and abuse. The offense that ultimately led to Holtzclaw's arrest occurred in the early hours of June 18, 2014. After completing his shift on the northeast side of Oklahoma City, he was driving to his residence when he made a traffic stop without reporting to police dispatch or running a records check on the driver. The driver, Janny Ligens, a 57-year-old woman passing through the impoverished area that Holtzclaw Holtzclaw was targeting, had no idea of the horrors that awaited her. Holtzclaw forced her to lift her shirt and pull down her pants before subjecting her to a degrading act of sexual assault. Terrified for her life, Ligens mustered the courage to report the incident to the police. Her bravery would set in motion a chain of events that would expose the true nature of Daniel Holtzclaw and bring him to justice. When Holtzclaw reported to the OKCPD Spring Lake Division Station the following afternoon for his daily shift, he was pulled aside by detectives Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory. They drove him to the department's sex crimes unit, where he would undergo a 2-hour interrogation. During the interrogation, Holtzclaw vehemently denied all accusations of misconduct during the Ligon stop. However, the detectives had evidence and statements from his girlfriend, Carrie Hunt, that contradicted his claims. It was clear to them that Holtzclaw was being untruthful. While Holtzclaw was released after the interrogation, his life as a police officer was effectively over. His commission and entry cards, uniform, badges, firearms, radio, and keys to his assigned police vehicle were seized. He was placed on indefinite paid administrative leave, pending further investigation. 2 months later, on August 21, 2014, Holtzclaw was arrested and charged with 16 counts of sexual abuse offenses. As the investigation progressed, a dozen additional complainants came forward, bringing the total number of women willing to testify against him to 13. Finally, on December 10, 2015, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom held its breath as the judge read out the charges against Holtzclaw. Guilty. The word reverberated through the room, bringing a mix of relief, vindication, and closure to the victims and their supporters. Holtzclaw was convicted on 18 of the charges, including first-degree rape, sexual battery, indecent exposure, stalking, forcible oral sodomy, and burglary. The jury recommended a sentence of 263 years in prison, ensuring that he would never walk free again. Desmond Mills. It was January 7, 2023, when Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black man, was pulled over by members of the Memphis Police Department's Scorpion Unit. The officers claimed they stopped Nichols for reckless driving, but what followed was a horrifying display of police brutality. Video footage from police body cameras and a nearby pole-mounted camera captured the events that unfolded that day. The officers, all members of the Scorpion Unit, pulled Nichols from his car and immediately resorted to excessive force. They pepper-sprayed and tasered him, leaving him disoriented and defenseless. Despite the assault, Nichols managed to break free from the officer's grasp and then tried to run away, but his escape was short-lived as 5 other officers caught up to him and continued the brutal assault. They punched, kicked, and pepper-sprayed him, even striking him with a baton. Eventually, Nichols was handcuffed and left in a critical condition. It was a horrifying display of abusive power and a complete disregard for human life. But the brutality didn't end there. As medics arrived at the scene, they shockingly failed to administer care for a staggering 16 minutes. Every second counted, but those precious minutes slipped away, further exacerbating Nichols' critical condition. Nichols was eventually admitted to the hospital, but his injuries were too severe. 3 days later, he tragically succumbed to the blunt force trauma to his head, his life cut short by the very people who were supposed to protect and serve. The release of the video footage sent shockwaves throughout the community and sparked widespread outrage. People took to the streets, demanding justice for Tyre Nichols and an end to police brutality. The images of his brutal beating were seared into the collective consciousness, igniting a national conversation about the urgent need for police reform. News outlets across the country covered the story extensively, shining a light on the systemic issues within law enforcement and the disproportionate use of force against black individuals. The New York Times, Fox News, CNN, and others provided updates on the case, amplifying the calls for accountability and justice. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the United States Department of Justice swiftly opened investigations into the incident, determined to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. The autopsy confirmed what the world already knew. Tyre Nichols' death was a homicide caused by the brutal force inflicted upon him. The 5 officers who assaulted Nichols were discharged from the Memphis Police Department and arrested on charges including second-degree murder. The wheels of justice were set in motion, but the fight for justice was far from over. One of the officers, Desmond Mills, made a shocking decision. He pleaded guilty to federal charges of excessive force and obstruction of justice. In a surprising turn of events, Mills agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in other cases, potentially exposing the extent of corruption within the police force. Mills remains free on bail, awaiting his sentencing hearing on May 22nd. The judge will ultimately decide his fate, but the guilty plea sends a powerful message that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to protect it. The jury, however, has promised to recommend no more than 16 years for his plea. Nichols' funeral was a somber affair, attended by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and Reverend Al Sharpton, who both called for police reforms. The tragic loss of Tyre Nichols serves as a stark reminder of the urgent need for comprehensive police reform and the ongoing fight for racial justice in America. Benjamin Gilson.
New video shows the moments a police car crashes into a motorcyclist in North Sacramento. That motorcyclist, 61-year-old Denzel Broadhurst, later died at the hospital.
It was the summer of 2022 when tragedy struck on the streets of Sacramento. Officer Benjamin Gilson, a trusted member of the police force, was on duty, patrolling the city he had sworn to protect. Little did anyone know that this day would mark a turning point in his life, one that would lead to his downfall. On that fateful day, Officer Gilson was driving his patrol car, responding to a call for assistance. As he raced through the city streets, his attention was divided, focused on the urgency of the situation at hand. In his haste, he failed to notice the approaching intersection where a motorcyclist was innocently making their way through the traffic. In a split second, Officer Gilson's patrol car collided with the motorcyclist, the impact reverberating through the air. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with the sound of screeching tires and the sight of mangled vehicles. The motorcyclist, caught off guard by the sudden collision, had no chance to evade the impending disaster. Emergency services were immediately dispatched to the scene, but it was too late. The motorcyclist had succumbed to their injuries, their life tragically cut short by Officer Gilson's reckless actions. The once promising officer, entrusted with the duty to protect and serve, had become the perpetrator of a heinous crime. The district attorney's office wasted no time in launching an investigation into the incident. The evidence against Officer Gilson was overwhelming, leaving no room for doubt. The crash was a direct result of his negligence and disregard for the safety of others on the road. The case against Officer Gilson went to trial, where the district attorney's office presented a compelling case, highlighting his reckless behavior and the devastating consequences it had on the victim and their family. The courtroom was filled with tension as the jury listened to the harrowing details of the crash. After careful deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Benjamin Gilson, the once respected police officer, was found guilty of vehicular manslaughter. The courtroom erupted in a mix of emotions, with the victim's family finding some solace in the fact that justice had been served. However, the story doesn't end there. In a surprising turn of events, Officer Gilson pleaded to an offer made by the court for 90 days in county jail. This decision was met with objection from the district attorney's office, who believed that a harsher punishment was warranted. Nevertheless, the court accepted Gilson's plea, suspending the 90-day sentence pending the completion of 100 hours of community service involving veterans services. This outcome left many in the community outraged. They questioned whether justice had truly been served, as Benjamin Gilson seemed to have escaped a more severe punishment. The decision to suspend his sentence raised concerns about the accountability of law enforcement officers and the potential for preferential treatment within the justice system. And this brings us to the end of this video. For more videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.